Former advisor to Donald Trump, Paul Manafort, sues the Department of Justice and Special Counsel Robert Mueller in a challenge to the Russia probe. Former campaign manager to Donald Trump, Paul Manafort, is firing back at the DOJ. Manafort is suing the DOJ and Robert Mueller, challenging the legitimacy of the Russia probe. Manafort alleges the Mueller probe has gone beyond its limits and should restrict itself to exploring connections between the Trump presidential campaign only and Russia. Unfortunately, Manafort was not charged by Mueller himself, but rather by the Justice Department, which is an extension of the executive branch of government, which, as we know, Donald Trump is the head. So for more on this, let's go now to Kimberly Wheely. She's a law professor at the University of Baltimore and associate independent counsel in the Whitewater investigation. Kim, thanks for being here with us today. So first, can you break down for us in layman's terms what it is that Paul Manafort's attorneys are attempting to do with this lawsuit against the DOJ?
Well, the relief requested in the complaint is to call off the indictment and to basically call off the appointment to Robert Mueller by Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. But the problem is that the actual legal claims don't match up with what they're asking for. They can't get what they're asking for based on what they're claiming was the legal violations here. The complaint, in my view, is basically a fail.
Okay, so
in the law.
the DOJ has already fired back, calling this lawsuit frivolous. But as an expert in this field, do you see any avenue that Manafort's team might have standing, seeing as they're claiming that Mueller's team has exceeded its scope?
No, I think that I would have to agree with the Justice Department in calling this frivolous. I mean, that's a term that's thrown around, but I think it's pretty serious here in that essentially the argument is that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein has the power under the statute to give the authority to Mueller, but if they wanted to extend it, he had to go back and ask himself, essentially, to extend it. So that's why it's a little silly. They don't claim that the statute giving Rosenstein the power to refer the matter to Mueller is unconstitutional. They don't claim that what Rosenstein did was a violation of some kind of statute. So it's hard to see what the actual legal violation here is other than the DOJ's own regulations, which essentially Rosenstein is implementing himself because he's the Attorney General in this matter, effectively.
Right, since Sessions has recused himself of all things Russia. So what sort of special authority does Bob Mueller have? What comes with the title special counsel on any sort of investigation? Are there extra rules that apply to him?
So that's a great question because we all know, or some of us know, the Whitewater investigation was the last time we saw this in the news, and that was a very different animal. That was a statute that created a whole separate, essentially, Justice Department. Here we're still within the Justice Department, which is why it's not a constitutional problem here. And after the Whitewater statute lapsed, the Attorney General...
In 1999, it's been a while.
Right. The Attorney General is given the authority to say, listen, we think there's a conflict within the Justice Department, so the Attorney General can bring an outside party to effectively act like a DOJ prosecutor. So the statute's pretty clear that he gets that authority. What it does, the regulation says, the DOJ own regulation says, is that he has to just outline what the scope of the investigation is. Here, Mr. Rosenstein said things that are directly related to the Russia investigation. I think the argument is if he's going to do that, he has to go back and ask himself for additional authority to do that and amend the appointment order. So at the end of the day, if they get what they can actually get, it's not a whole lot. It's not going to call off the indictment.
Just weird technicalities, and I'm sure they can file anything that they want. So since you were working on the Whitewater investigation, how is Mueller's post different from the appointment of Ken Starr back in the 90s during the Clinton era?
So Ken Starr, there was a viable and very fierce constitutional battle over the constitutionality of his appointment, because essentially that statute took Ken Starr out of the line of authority to the president. And so the idea is the president's the boss of the executive branch. The president's in charge of everybody below him. He can appoint and remove those folks. Congress created a whole new separate entity in the wake of Watergate and said, listen, we can't let the president be in charge of hiring and firing people that investigate himself. But the court upheld that, held that as constitutional. It still debated the legitimacy of that ruling. Justice Scalia wrote a very famous dissent. But Congress let that lapse. So now we're back to our three branches of government, and ultimately Mr. Rosenstein is accountable to President Trump. So
and Bob Mueller.
Yeah, and so is Bob Mueller. So it's really much ado about nothing from a constitutional standpoint.
All kind of circular and kind of weird. It's kind of Alice in Wonderland
It,
right now.
it is, yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us, Kim Wheely.
Thank you for having me.